right, Forgotten City, Chapter 3. Kobe burst out onto the street and started running. A moment later, he heard a crash. Looking over his shoulder, he saw a huge, four-legged shape skid out onto the sidewalk, raining shattered glass from its gray fur. Another shape followed, slightly smaller. As Kobe took them in, his blood turned cold. Wolves, the bigger ones 6 feet tall at least. They'd come straight through the glass door, claws curled and jagged, scraping the ground, bellies bloated from hunger. The creature's eyes gleamed a waste-infected, sickly yellow. Kobe scanned his surroundings. He was out in the open with no shelter in sight, and he knew he couldn't outrun the wolves. In a life and death situation, make a decision quickly and don't change your mind. Kobe stopped and turned to face the wolves, which were maybe 50 feet away. His arms felt heavy. Move, he commanded himself. He reached for his crossbow and leveled the sight at the smaller creature's head. For a second, he imagined his dad looking over his shoulder, like when they used to do target practice in the gym. Always go for the body. It's the biggest target. He dropped his aim and pulled the trigger, but his hands were shaking and the bolt thumped into the wolf's foreleg. It jerked back, then reached down with its jaws and gripped the shaft between its teeth. With a sharp tug, the bolt tore loose. Waste didn't only make some creatures larger, it made them smarter too. Kobe's crossbow reloaded automatically. He fired again, and the second bolt embedded in the larger animal's neck. It let out a strangled, guttural growl and came to a stop. The other creature halted and turned to its companion. Kobe aimed for the smaller creature's chest and pulled the trigger once more, but the bolt mechanism jammed. The wolf took a lopping pace forward, and Kobe knew it was a split second from attacking. He was stuck. If he ran, he'd be taken out in no time. A shadow fell from above, along with a whir like a nest of hornets. The larger wolf shrank back as a snatcher descended, gleaming and hovering on air jets that blasted the foliage. The snatcher's legs scooped up the smaller predator. For a moment, all Kobe saw were legs scrambling through the gaps, accompanied by a terrified yelping. Then the snatcher shot vertically from the road. The whole thing had taken less than a couple of seconds. That could have been me. Kobe shouldered the crossbow and fled. He didn't look back. Didn't need to because he could hear the wolf's paws pounding fast along the road behind him. He concentrated on the road ahead and on the driving, every last ounce of power into his legs. No rules for this, just survive at any cost. Buildings blurred past on either side. Then he plunged into a thicket of trees. Twigs whipped his skin and lashed his clothes as he stumbled over roots. The crash of foliage on his back grew closer. The machete in its sheath bounced against its leg. Still running, he pulled the bare musk can from its holster and drew his machete. He slammed the blade into the can, and an explosion of scent misted out into a cloud. Kobe tossed the can over his shoulder, hoping it would fall somewhere in the wolf's path. Sure enough, the paws slowed. A tree lay across the road ahead. Kobe vaulted it, then veered left, doubling back. He pressed up against a thick trunk, fighting for air. He heard nothing but his own heavy breathing. Risking a look, he saw the creature with its muzzle to the ground, moving around the misting can. The stink of bear was overpowering. If I get out of this, I promise I'll never be careless again. The wolf lifted its head from the can, swaying its massive, shaggy head back and forth. Kobe could see its nostrils flaring. Then it moved slowly forward, dipping its head ever so often. I did it! I fooled it! The wolf was walking away, putting distance between them. 20 feet, 25. It jumped onto the same log Kobe had leaped over and paused, staring intently at the ground for a few seconds. Kobe realized what it was looking at. His footprint. A skidded smear of mud as he'd made a turn. The wolf turned too, looking toward his hiding place, and Kobe froze. He couldn't tell if the creature could see him through the thick foliage, but the wolf's gaze was unyielding. The wolf took a pace in his direction. Kobe didn't know whether to move or sit tight. Another step, then another, quicker. It broke into a run. Kobe shoved himself away from the tree and took off. He splashed through a muddy gully, ducked under a hanging branch, and then suddenly he was clear of the trees. His sneakers were soaked, though, squelching with every step as he headed up a narrower street. An old traffic signal lay at an angle, collapsed onto the roof of a delivery truck. Kobe ducked beneath it, keeping his stride on the far side. He could run the 60-yard dash in under 7 seconds, but he was pretty sure a waste wolf could do it faster. In a storefront window, he saw the reflection as the wolf flew at him, eating up the ground with its uneven strides. How long could he keep going? Where was he going? And what would he do if it caught up to him? His breaths were ragged, choked up, and near sobbing with fear, but then he saw it ahead. Fire escape! Its grated metal platform was a story up against the side of a large white building. 15 feet until he could grab hold of the lower section. Can I make it? If I don't, the wolf snarled, and he could have sworn he smelled its fetid breath. Kobe launched himself into the air and knew at once it wasn't enough. He hit the wall and reached, fingertips a fraction short. His feet scrambled, and somehow the toes of his sneakers found some grip, giving him an extra push. His fingers closed on metal and held on. He pulled himself up. Then he heard the snap of the wolf's teeth, and his arms screamed out at a sudden extra weight. The creature had its jaws fastened on the sole of Kobe's sneaker, its front paws reaching up as it reared against the wall, straining. Kobe wailed and yanked up his foot, and the wolf dropped back, the shoe a tiny morsel in its mouth. Kobe rolled up onto the fire escape's platform. Below, the wolf dropped the shoe and launched itself again, but it couldn't reach. It growled and tried once more, eyes rabid with hunger and mouth drooling. Finally, it settled back, prowling with angry strides up and down below him. The bolt still protruded from its neck, trailing blood over its thick fur. Though his pulse was racing, Kobe's breath slowly returned to normal. As it did, he began to process. His knapsack was back in the supermarket, and there was no way he was going back there. But he still had his weapons, luckily, and the map. Kobe took it from his back pocket, trying not to think of the pacing wolf below, and tried to work out exactly where he was. From his vantage point, there were no landmarks. Everything he saw looked like jungle. He traced his finger up the block from the supermarket. Had he taken a left or a right? How far had he run? Then he saw the SODO Medical Center, marked with one of his dad's M's. It was 3 blocks from the supermarket. He looked up at the modern building rising above him. This could be it. The fire escape looped all the way up to the roof 5 floors above. Leaving the wolf to its frustrating pacing and snarling, Kobe climbed the ladders and worked his way up 2 more stories. Blinds were drawn across most of the windows. He chose a window at random and drew his machete. He knew he couldn't risk heading all the way up to the roof itself. Up there, any snatchers with 10 blocks would stop him. He slammed the machete's hilt into the glass, and its spider cracked. It felt wrong to be making so much noise, but there was no way around it. A second blow sent the glass fragments tumbling over the frame. A few shards sprinkled 3 floors down to where the wolf was waiting. Kobe used the blade to knock the remaining pieces out, pulled up the blinds, and looked inside. The window opened into an office lined with books and dominated by a large desk. Several old potted plants had burst from their confines and spread up the walls and across the ceiling. Kobe threw his leg inside and climbed in. The computer terminal on the desk was covered in sprouting fungus, as was the back of the tall desk chair. A nameplate on the desk read, Dr. Miriam Argento. So this is the hospital. Kobe walked towards the door, 1 foot in just a sock. He was probably safe inside the building, and there was a chance he'd find food somewhere there. He couldn't stay inside forever, of course, but he might also source some basics like morphine, antiseptics, and bandages. Clean syringes were always a bonus, too, for his dad's anti waste shots. Despite everything, Kobe started to feel positive. He could eat, lie low, and then head out again at first light. After he passed the desk, he noticed the waste paper basket and a copy of the Seattle Times. Curious, he picked it out. He'd seen a couple of newspapers before, but years ago, before he could even read properly. His dad had never liked having them around. Kobe guessed that seeing them made him remember the painful stuff, like Mom. She died just a few days after Kobe was born, and his dad never spoke about her. Whenever Kobe tried, his dad just shut down. So in the end, Kobe simply stopped asking. The print was still clear, and the date across the top was March 19th, 2031. Kobe knew from his dad's history lessons that this was about a month after the outbreak. The headline read, "Hospitals Overrun. Police Urge Residents to Stay Indoors." Fascinated, eyes scanning the text, Kobe went to sit in the chair. With one hand on the back, he spun it around. His heart jumped into his throat as a decomposed body slid off the seat, crumpling at his feet. Kobe leaped back, tripping and crashing into one of the plants. He tried to push himself farther away, but found himself pressed against the wall, staring into the eye sockets of a skull.